the Children's Book Project by Paige Tolbard. Paige is with us, and she is a junior majoring in social work, and she is going to tell us about a children's book that she has written that's designed to help children who are dealing with trauma and stress. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Paige. And if at any time you have questions during the presentation for Paige, you can type those into the Q&A, and we'll be happy to ask them at the end of her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. So my project is the same, we're in the same class, Mame and I. So the goal is the same, bibliotherapy, but I wrote a little bit of a presentation talking about the class and what we had to go over, so I'll share my screen now. So hopefully everyone can see the Google Slides. And so it's titled Coping with Experiencing Trauma for Children, and my name is Paige Tolbard. So have you ever felt so emotional, so angry, upset, overwhelmed, or stressed that it felt like the entire world was going to collapse? If you haven't been subjected to that, especially during a global pandemic, you're lucky, because everybody feels this way at times, including children. Except for children, they don't know how to deal with feeling like this. Especially children living in homes where they're witnessing or even experiencing abuse. For these children, a hint of anger can feel like the entire world is going to collapse. In Social Work 214, Child Welfare Policies and Services, the class I'm writing this book for, we learn about how do we protect children as a vulnerable population. So children are young and they don't have a voice for themselves. Their parents are normally their voices in court, in the doctor's office. So how do we protect these people who cannot protect themselves? So the class talks about issues such as children experiencing homelessness, children experiencing poverty, children whose parents are dealing with addiction, children whose parents are incarcerated or family members are incarcerated, children living in foster care, children who are having kids, teenage pregnancy, and children with developmental and educational disabilities, such as what Mame introduced in the Libby's book. So basically, the class talks about how can we protect these people who cannot protect themselves. So in the class, the term ACEs comes up repeatedly, and ACE is an adverse childhood experience, and it's defined as potentially traumatic events that occur during childhood. There are 10 ACEs, and they're all listed up here. 1 is physical abuse, 2, emotional neglect, 3, physical neglect, 4, emotional abuse, 5, sexual abuse, 6, having an incarcerated relative, 7, parents divorced or separated, 8, witnessing domestic violence, 9, having a relative experiencing issues with addiction or substance abuse, and 10 is mental illness in the household. So the risk of experiencing an ACE or an adverse childhood experiences, the children who are living in these homes experiencing these issues of neglect and abuse are at higher risk of heart disease, stroke, substance abuse, difficulty with impulse control, overactive stress responses, chronic health problems, mental illness, suicide, unemployment, poor performance in education, cancer, and respiratory disease. So there are a lot of negative impacts to experiencing trauma and abuse for children. And it's the same thing. Children can't stand up for themselves, and a lot of times they don't have a way to avoid these situations in the home. So the book that I wrote gives children a way to feel better within themselves and to self-regulate their emotions. So that way, at least among all this chaos, they can feel a little bit better within themselves. So one way for children to bounce back and best survive from experiencing ACEs or abuse or neglect is resilience. And resilience is defined as the ability to bounce back from one's difficulties in life. And for children, developing resilience requires a stable and present, loving adult in their life. It doesn't have to be a parent. It doesn't have to be a caretaker. Just somebody that the child can look up to and know that their presence is loving, and somebody in their corner all the time when they might not have anybody else there for them. So for children who experience emotional neglect, they have no way to develop healthy coping mechanisms to deal with their emotions. For whatever reason, their parents weren't able to teach them emotional regulation. So this forces children to find their own ways to self-soothe, which can have negative impacts on their education or physical and mental well-being. For example, if kids don't know how to regulate their emotions and they're feeling overwhelmed, they might turn to drugs, violence, gang activities, suicide, skipping school, or violent outbursts. And none of these teach children how to deal with what they're feeling. They simply just provide a temporary solution to their feeling overwhelmed. And most of the times the outcomes for these choices are negative outcomes. So luckily there's something that can help these children. It's called bibliotherapy, and bibliotherapy is defined as the use of books to help children and young adults deal with psychological, emotional, and other personal issues that arise in their lives. So for Social Work 214, I created a book meant to help children and young adults learn a way to cope with overwhelming feelings. So it's titled The Breath Square, and it introduces the mindfulness technique of breath work to children. And the book is designed to help children identify and validate their own feelings and decide on a constructive course of action. The children is meant for, or the book is meant for children who are experiencing emotional neglect and also emotional abuse. A lot of it is just based on a lot of that can cause emotional turmoil in a child. So this book is meant for children who don't know how to deal with their emotions, to find a way to just take a pause and take a second and just sit there and just feel the emotions and just let themselves calm down for a little bit. So this is a healthier choice. Instead of turning to drugs or skipping school or violent outbursts, this allows children to take a second and relax. So I hope that I can share the PDF with you. I have it right here. So I would like to read the book to y'all. So it's titled The Breath Square, and the main character is Emiliano. So this is Emiliano. Emiliano is a normal kid, and he enjoys normal things like playing soccer, reading, and running with his little sister. Sometimes Emiliano's life gets kind of hard. His parents fight a lot, and all the yelling makes Emiliano feel upset. Emiliano also has people at school that are really mean to him. This makes him feel the same way as when his parents fight. Emiliano cries whenever he feels like this, and sometimes he cries so hard his head hurts. Everyone has hard things in their life, and everyone can feel how Emiliano feels at times. We might not cry like Emiliano does, we might get angry, or we might not want to talk to anybody. Whatever we feel, it is important to remember that it is okay to feel this way. While we all feel this way sometimes, there's something that we can do to help us feel a little bit better. It's called the breath square. The breath square helps us whenever we are feeling overwhelmed, sad, angry, or stressed. The breath square is a tool we use to help us take a deep breath. It's called a square because it tells us to take 4 equal breaths the same way a square has 4 equal sides. When we use the breath square, it is important to remember that the only thing to focus on is our breath. You may have some thoughts come into your head while you use the breath square. Just notice them and let them go. Try to bring your attention back to your breath. The breath square goes like this. Do it with Emiliano. And if you would like, I encourage you to take this deep breath in with me and Emiliano because I'll be counting. So first, we take a 4-second deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we hold that breath for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then breathe out for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Last, hold for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Emiliano counts to 4 in his head with every breath, but you can count out loud if you would like. It doesn't matter how you count, the most important part to remember is to breathe. When things feel stressful or overwhelming, a deep breath can help us feel a little better. It certainly helps Emiliano. Emiliano has been using the breath square for a while now, and he notices how much better he feels whenever he uses it. He hopes it helps you feel better too. So that's the book. That's the book in its entirety. And the goals of the book were just to practice empathy so the child can learn how to empathize with themselves, and also for me to learn how to empathize with children and understand how children deal with emotions. The goal is also to validate a child's feelings. When the book says, remember that it's okay to feel this way, and that's really important for a child to know, because if a child is feeling overwhelmed and they also are feeling that they shouldn't feel like this, or they're invalid for feeling like this, then it's only going to add to them feeling overwhelmed or stressed out. And so by validating the child's feelings and letting the child know that it's okay to feel that way, it decreases the amount of stress they're feeling within themselves. The book, another goal is to reassure the child that they're not the only ones feeling like this. I mean, the book is important. It lets the child know that there are other kids feeling like this, but there are adults that feel like this all the time. So it's important to let the child know they're not alone, that they're not the only one dealing with this. There's people that they can reach out to help them. Also to teach children a constructive way to deal with emotions. Like I said, instead of turning to violent outbursts or drugs, or they can turn within themselves and just take a second and breathe. And also emotional regulation, so that after the 4 breaths are up, the child can take a second and decide what do they need and figure out in themselves what do they need in that moment to help them feel better. And hopefully there's a caretaker or adult on the other end waiting to say, what do you need from me? What can I do to help you? And that way the child can learn how to express what they need and feel better. So that's my presentation.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. We have a question in the Q&A. It's from Nia, and she says, do you plan to donate your book to children in a shelter?
I didn't think about that. I wouldn't be against that. I think that's a really good idea. So I would be open to that if I knew how to get the book to a shelter. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to ask too, the artwork was wonderful. Did you do that all creatively on your own?
Yeah, I did. I drew it.
That's wonderful. That's great. The illustrations really made your points so very clear. Nice comments. Great job. So amazing, Paige. Yay, Paige. Great job. So lots of folks in the audience appreciating your sharing your project with us today. If you had to do it again, would you do anything differently?
Not with like the words in the book, but I think I would space the words out just so it would be a little easier for like you to read on the screen. I have the physical copy right next to me and it's easier to read, but as a PDF, the words kind of look like they got jumbled together on the screen. So I would do that differently.
Very good, very good. Just a second longer to see if we have any other questions for Paige before we let her go today. Looks like we're in good shape, Paige. This was part of a course that you took, and I see that you are a major in social work. What are you planning to do after graduation? You're in your junior year, is that correct?
Yes, yeah. I would like to work as a therapist, but now that I've taken this course, I'm kind of thinking that I might change and start working on working with kids in schools and maybe being like a school social worker. I think that would be really interesting.
Oh, very good. Yeah. And have you taken any art courses or any kind of art therapy in mind for your work in the future?
No, but I think art therapy would be really interesting to take, especially for children.
With the bibliotherapy, can you tell us a little bit more about that concept that you mentioned early on in your presentation?
It's just the idea that books give children or people in general, but especially for children, because sometimes children, they are visual learners because they're learning so young, and if you talk to them, they can't grasp all the concepts you're saying to them. So bibliotherapy and books allow children to see what they should be learning with pictures, and it helps them grasp the concepts and information better. And so it can be stress relieving, like mine is. It helps them provide like mindfulness techniques, but also Mame's book is also bibliotherapy. It's an example of bibliotherapy, and it just shows kids that they're not alone and that there's other people going through what they're going through, and that's also really important for children too.
Yeah, and can be translated into multiple languages
Yeah.
and used in different contexts, that kind of thing. Well, very good. Thank you so much for your presentation today. With that, if we have no other questions, I will let Paige go. Great job, Paige. Yet another comment or two here. This was amazing, Paige. So amazing. So thank you for your participation in Inspires today.